Billionaire came home early and burst into tears when he found the maid's Toddler washing his clothes. Daniel Cole was 34 years old, and he owned more money than he could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. His company built skyscrapers in 5 countries. His name appeared in magazines. His house sat on a hill with 12 bedrooms, a pool shaped like a lake, and a garden that took 6 workers to maintain. But Daniel was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. The kind that lived in his chest like a stone. He had flown home early from a business trip in Chicago. The meeting had ended sooner than planned, and instead of staying another night in a cold hotel room, he told his driver to take him straight home. He didn't call ahead. He didn't want anyone fussing over him, rearranging schedules, pretending to be surprised. He just wanted quiet. His house was always quiet. Too quiet. His parents had passed away 5 years ago, within 6 months of each other. He had no wife, no children, no brothers or sisters. Just staff who came in the morning and left in the evening, and a big house that echoed every time he walked through it. The only person who still lived on the property, in the small guest cottage behind the main house, was Maria Torres, his housekeeper. She had worked for his family since before Daniel was born. She had known him as a baby, as a boy, as a grieving young man standing at his parents' funeral. She was more like family than staff, though Daniel rarely said this out loud. He was not a man who said things out loud. Maria had a daughter, Elena, born just 3 years ago, when Maria was already in her 40s and had long given up hope of having a child of her own. Elena's father had left before she was even born, and Maria raised her alone, working every day, carrying her daughter to the cottage in the evenings, exhausted but grateful. Daniel had seen Elena maybe a dozen times. A small girl with dark curly hair and enormous brown eyes, always shy around him, always hiding behind her mother's skirt. He didn't know much about children. He had never really tried to know. That evening, he walked through the side door instead of the front, the way he used to when he was a boy sneaking in after curfew. The hallway that led to the laundry room was dim, lit only by the small window near the ceiling. He heard water running. He heard something else too, a small voice humming. He stopped. The laundry room door was half open. Daniel stood in the shadow of the hallway and looked inside. There, standing on an overturned plastic bucket pushed up against the deep basin sink, was Elena. Her sleeves were rolled up past her elbows, soaked through anyway. Her small hands, red from the cold water, were scrubbing at something blue, one of his dress shirts, the expensive kind, the kind that cost more than most people made in a week. She was humming a tune he didn't recognize, something soft and simple, the kind of song a mother sings to a child at bedtime. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration as she rubbed the fabric between her small fists, exactly the way she must have seen her mother do 1,000 times. On the floor beside the bucket sat a small pile of his other clothes. A few socks, a folded undershirt, a pair of pants that were far too big for her to lift by herself, so she had dragged them across the floor instead. Water had splashed everywhere. Her little dress was soaked. Her hair stuck to her forehead. Daniel's chest tightened. Elena! The word came out quieter than he meant it to. The little girl spun around so fast she nearly slipped off the bucket. Her eyes went wide with fear, the kind of fear that told Daniel this was not the first time she had done something like this, and not the first time she had been afraid of getting caught. Sorry, she stammered, her voice small and trembling. Mama's sick. Help. I wash Mr. Daniel clothes good, I promise I careful. Daniel's mind raced back through the last few days. He hadn't been home. He hadn't known Maria was sick. Nobody had told him, because nobody ever told him anything that might sound like a burden, like a complaint, like an inconvenience to the great and busy Mr. Cole. Where is your mother? He asked, kneeling down slowly so he wasn't towering over her anymore. Elena pointed toward the cottage, out past the small window. Mama's sleep. Mama say don't wake her. I do the wash. I big girl now. She held up his shirt proudly, dripping wet, still stained where a coffee spill had never quite come out. She had scrubbed and scrubbed, but a 3-year-old's hands could only do so much. Still, she looked at him with a hope so pure it nearly broke him. The hope of a child who believed, with all her small heart, that she was helping. "I do good job?" she asked. Daniel opened his mouth to answer. Nothing came out. He looked at her soaked dress, her trembling lips, her small red hands still holding his shirt like it was the most important task in the world. He thought of Maria, sick and alone in the cottage, too proud or too afraid to ask for help, while her 3-year-old daughter tried to take care of a grown man's laundry so her mother wouldn't lose her job. Something cracked open inside Daniel's chest, something that had been sealed shut since his mother died, since he learned that love was something you lost, since he decided it was safer to build walls of glass and steel around himself instead of trusting anyone with his heart again. He didn't decide to cry. Simply happened. The tears came fast and hot, and he pressed the back of his hand against his eyes, ashamed and unable to stop. Elena's small face crumpled with worry. She climbed down off the bucket, wobbling on wet feet, and walked toward him. "Mr. Daniel sad," she whispered. "I sorry. I do bad job." And that was when Daniel Cole, billionaire businessman, a man the world believed had everything, sank to his knees on the wet laundry room floor and wept like he hadn't wept since he was a boy. Daniel had built an empire out of concrete and steel, but he had never learned how to hold a crying moment inside himself without turning away from it. Yet here, on his knees on the cold tile floor, he let it happen. He let the tears fall. Elena stood in front of him, unsure what to do, her small hands still dripping soapy water onto the floor. Children have an instinct grown-ups often lose, the instinct to comfort, simply and without complication. She reached out and patted his shoulder the way her mother patted hers when she had a bad dream. "Don't cry, Mr. Daniel," she said softly. "Mama say crying okay. Crying let the sad out." Daniel let out a broken laugh through his tears. "Your mama is a wise woman." "Mama very smart," Elena agreed proudly. Then her small face grew serious again. "You sad because clothes not clean good. Try again." "I scrub harder." No. Daniel wiped his face with his sleeve, something he hadn't done since he was a child himself. "The clothes are perfect, Elena. You did a wonderful job." He looked at her properly then. Really looked, the way he hadn't allowed himself to look at another human being in longer than he could remember. He saw the effort in her small body, the exhaustion under her eyes despite her young age, the quiet worry etched into a face that should have known nothing but play and cartoons and simple joy. "How long has your mama been sick?" he asked gently. Elena counted on her fingers, the way small children do when trying to remember something important. 2 days, she said. "She has fever. To say she okay but she shake a lot. I bring her water. I try to make her toast but I not reach the toaster." She said this last part with genuine disappointment, as if failing to make toast was her greatest shame. Daniel felt something twist painfully in his chest. 2 days. His housekeeper had been sick for 2 days, alone in a cottage on his property, with nothing but a 3-year-old to care for her, while he sat in conference rooms discussing quarterly profits. He stood up, his knees aching from the hard floor, and reached down to gently take Elena's small wet hand. "Let's go check on your mama, okay? And then we're going to get you both some help." Elena nodded seriously, as if this was an important mission, and walked beside him with her chin held high despite her soaked dress and cold bare feet. The cottage was small but tidy, the way Maria kept everything, a place with little money but great care poured into every corner. Daniel knocked softly before entering. Maria lay on the small bed, her face pale, sweat on her brow, a thin blanket pulled over her. "Mr. Cole," she rasped, trying to sit up, her eyes widening with panic when she saw him standing in her doorway. "I'm so sorry, sir. I know I should have called someone. I didn't want to bother." "Maria, stop." Daniel's voice was firm but not unkind. You're sick. Why didn't you tell anyone? Maria's eyes filled with tears of her own, tears of exhaustion, of fear, of the particular shame that poor people often carry when illness threatens the only thing standing between them and disaster: their job. I didn't want you to think I couldn't do my work. I didn't want you to think. She stopped, glancing guiltily toward her daughter. I told Elena to stay quiet, to let me sleep it off. I didn't know she was. She was washing my shirts, Daniel said quietly. Maria's face went white with horror. Oh God! Mr. Cole, I am so sorry. She must have seen me do the wash before and thought. Maria! Daniel knelt beside the bed, the same way he'd knelt in the laundry room minutes before. I am not upset. I am the opposite of upset. Do you understand? Your daughter is the kindest, most caring child I have ever met. She didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, already dialing. I'm calling my personal doctor. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Sir, that's not necessary. I just need rest. I don't have the money for. You will never again finish that sentence in this house, Daniel said, and something in his voice made Maria fall silent. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to grief and determination, and a promise all mixed together. While they waited for the doctor, Daniel sat on the small wooden chair beside Maria's bed, and Elena climbed up onto his lap without asking permission, the way small children do when they've decided someone is safe. She was still damp from the laundry water, and Daniel didn't care at all. He wrapped his suit jacket around her small shoulders and held her while her mother rested. Maria watched this scene through tired, tear-filled eyes, hardly believing what she was seeing. The great Daniel Cole, the man who owned half the buildings in the city, sitting in her tiny cottage in a $1,000 suit, holding her daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. She's been asking for you, you know, Maria whispered. Every time you leave for a trip. She waits by the window. She calls you her friend. Daniel looked down at Elena, who had fallen asleep against his chest, exhausted from her long day of secret laundry duty and worry. Something warm spread through his chest where the cold stone used to sit. I didn't know, he said quietly. I'm sorry, I didn't know. The doctor arrived shortly after, examined Maria, and diagnosed a bad case of the flu combined with sheer exhaustion. He prescribed rest, fluids, and medication, and firmly told Maria that she was not to lift a single finger for the next week. But my work, Maria began, is done for the week, Daniel interrupted. Paid in full. And starting tomorrow, someone will bring you and Elena meals until you're back on your feet. Maria's eyes overflowed again, but this time the tears were different. They were the tears of someone who had spent years believing she was invisible, learning that someone had finally seen her. The days that followed were unlike anything Daniel's house had experienced in years. He canceled 2 business trips, something his assistant Rachel had never once seen him do in the 6 years she'd worked for him. When she called, worried something was wrong, Daniel simply told her. Something important came up. Reschedule everything for next week. Is everything all right, Mr. Cole? Rachel asked carefully. Daniel looked across the kitchen, where Elena sat on a stool, her feet swinging far above the floor, carefully helping him spread peanut butter on bread with a butter knife twice the size of her hand. Maria sat nearby in a chair, still recovering but much stronger, watching with a soft smile she hadn't worn in longer than she could remember. Everything, Daniel said slowly, is more than all right. He hired a part-time nurse to check on Maria daily until she was fully recovered, though Maria protested that it was too much. He arranged for a proper play area to be set up in the sunroom, something the massive house had never had, since it had never needed one before. He found himself, a man who once measured his days in meetings and deal closings, instead measuring them by how many times he could make a 3-year-old giggle. It surprised him, how easily Elena settled into his life, and how much emptier the house felt on the one afternoon Maria took her out to a doctor's follow-up appointment. Daniel walked through his enormous, silent home and realized, for the first time, exactly how lonely he had been. He thought about his own childhood in this same house. The long hallways, the private tutors, the parents who loved him but were always busy, always traveling, always managing empires instead of building blanket forts. He had turned out fine, or so he always told himself. He had money, success, respect. But sitting in that too-quiet house, he understood now what had actually been missing. Connection. Warmth. Someone small and unguarded who trusted him simply because he was kind to her, not because of what he owned or what he could give. One evening, about a week after that first tearful night in the laundry room, Daniel sat on the floor of the sunroom while Elena built an elaborate castle out of wooden blocks, narrating the entire process in her own invented language of half-words and sound effects. Maria, now much recovered, sat nearby folding a small basket of laundry. Her own laundry this time, done properly with the washing machine, not scrubbed by tiny exhausted hands in a deep basin sink. "Mr. Daniel," Elena said, holding up a lopsided block tower with great pride. "Look, castle for you. You king." "Am I?" Daniel said, smiling in the easy way he'd nearly forgotten how to do. "What does the king have to do?" Elena considered this seriously. "King take care of people," she declared. "King share. King not be sad no more." Daniel felt his throat tighten again, though this time it was a gentler ache. "I think I can do that," he said. Maria watched the exchange, her hands stilling on the laundry in her lap. "She adores you, you know," she said quietly. "I've never seen her open up to anyone the way she has with you. Not even her own." She stopped herself, the old wound of Elena's absent father still tender. Daniel looked over at her. "You raised an incredible little girl, Maria. All on your own. That takes more strength than anything I've ever done in a boardroom." Maria's eyes softened, glossy with unshed tears. "Some days I don't feel strong at all. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding on." "You're not alone anymore," Daniel said, and meant it fully, though even he wasn't entirely sure yet what shape that promise would take. That night, after Maria had carried a sleepy Elena back to the cottage, Daniel sat alone in his enormous kitchen, staring at the spot where the little girl had spread peanut butter with such fierce concentration hours before. He thought about the version of himself who had walked through that side door a week ago. Exhausted, hollow, successful by every measure that mattered to the outside world and empty by every measure that actually mattered. He thought about how close he had come to missing this. If his meeting hadn't ended early. If he'd taken the front door instead of the side one. If he hadn't paused outside that laundry room door. He picked up his phone and made a call, one he'd been thinking about for days. "Rachel," he said when his assistant answered. "I need you to look into something for me. Local schools, good ones with strong early education programs. And I want to set up a fund for children of employees. Scholarships, healthcare, whatever they need. Start researching first thing tomorrow." "Of course, Mr. Cole," Rachel said, though he could hear the surprise in her voice. "May I ask what brought this on?" Daniel looked out the window toward the small cottage light glowing warmly in the distance, where he knew Maria was tucking her daughter into bed. "A 3-year-old taught me something about what actually matters," he said simply. "It's about time I did something with the lesson." Weeks passed, and the house on the hill changed in ways none of the staff could quite explain, though all of them noticed. Mr. Cole smiled more. He came home earlier. He asked after people's families, remembered small details about their lives he'd never bothered with before. The house itself seemed warmer, less like a museum and more like somewhere people actually lived. Every evening without fail, Daniel spent time with Elena and Maria. Sometimes it was simple. Dinner together in the kitchen instead of him eating alone in the formal dining room while staff cleared plates in respectful silence. Sometimes it was reading Elena a bedtime story. his deep voice doing exaggerated character impressions that made her shriek with laughter. Sometimes it was just sitting quietly while Maria told him stories about Elena's early years, about the fear and joy of raising a child completely alone, about the small victories that meant the world to her. Elena's first steps, her first word, the day she stopped needing a night light. Daniel found himself hungry for these stories in a way he'd never been hungry for anything in the business world. Numbers and deals had never made him feel the way it felt to watch Elena take her first bite of ice cream and freeze in pure astonished delight, or to hear Maria laugh, really laugh, for the first time in what she admitted had been years. But not everyone in Daniel's life understood this transformation. His business partner, Richard Hale, called one afternoon, his voice sharp with concern. "Daniel, people are talking. You've missed 3 important dinners this month. You cancelled the Henderson deal meeting. What is going on with you?" Daniel, sitting on the porch steps watching Elena chase bubbles that Maria blew for her across the lawn, didn't even feel the old irritation that questions like this used to trigger. "I'm fine, Richard. Better than fine, actually." "Is this about the housekeeper's kid?" Richard asked, his tone shifting into something colder. "I heard you've practically adopted them." "Daniel, people will start to talk. It doesn't look right, a man in your position getting this involved with staff." Something in Daniel went very still. "Say that again." "I'm just saying there are appearances to consider. Your reputation." "Richard," Daniel said, his voice quiet but absolutely firm, "let me be very clear about something. That little girl and her mother have shown me more genuine kindness in 1 month than most of the people at those dinners have shown me in years. If my reputation can't survive me caring about good people, then my reputation was never worth protecting in the first place." He hung up before Richard could respond, and turned his attention back to the lawn, where Elena had abandoned the bubbles entirely and was now attempting to teach Daniel's old golden retriever, Max, how to dance, which mostly involved her spinning in circles while the patient old dog watched with mild confusion. Maria walked over and sat beside him on the steps. "Everything all right?" she asked, having overheard enough of the phone call to guess its content. "Better than all right," Daniel said. "I think I finally understand what my father meant near the end, when he told me that all his buildings meant nothing compared to the people who filled them." Maria was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Cole, Daniel," she corrected herself gently, at his insistence weeks ago that she dropped the formality. "I need to say something, and I hope you won't take it wrong." "Go ahead. You've been wonderful to us. More than wonderful. But I worry sometimes that Elena is getting used to something that might not last. Your world and ours are very different. I don't want her heart broken when things go back to normal." Daniel turned to look at her fully, and what she saw in his face made her breath catch. "Maria, I need you to understand something. This isn't a phase. This isn't me being generous because I feel sorry for you or bored or looking for some passing distraction. That little girl changed something in me that I didn't even know was broken. I don't want things to go back to normal. I want this to be normal from now on." Maria's eyes filled with tears again, though these were becoming more frequent lately. Not from sadness, but from an emotion she was still learning to trust, the feeling of being truly cared for after years of simply surviving. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Daniel said. "Just let me keep showing you." Out on the lawn, Elena had given up on teaching Max to dance and instead flopped down in the grass beside him, giggling as the old dog gently licked her cheek. She looked over at the porch, saw Daniel and her mother watching her, and waved with the entire unrestrained joy that only small children seem to possess. "Mama, Mr. Daniel, come play." And so they did. The billionaire and the housekeeper, both slightly ridiculous in the fading evening light, chasing a giggling 3-year-old and an elderly golden retriever across a lawn that had, for years, sat empty and unused, existing only as decoration for a house that had forgotten how to be a home. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, The grand house on the hill looked entirely different than it had on the night Daniel Cole first came home early and found a soaking wet toddler scrubbing his shirts in the laundry room sink. The formal, untouched sunroom now held a permanent corner of toys, books, and a small reading nook Daniel had built himself, with Maria's amused supervision, after 2 failed attempts and 1 minor argument with a power drill. The kitchen, once used mainly for staff to prepare meals that Daniel ate alone, now regularly filled with laughter, flour-dusted counters, and the particular chaos that comes from teaching a small child how to bake cookies. Maria no longer lived in the guest cottage. At Daniel's insistence, gentle at first, then increasingly firm as weeks passed, she and Elena had moved into a spacious set of rooms within the main house itself. Maria still worked, though her role had shifted entirely. She now managed the household staff and, more importantly to her, spent her days watching her daughter grow up surrounded by warmth and security she'd never dared hope for. Daniel had changed too, in ways visible to everyone who knew him. He still ran his company, still closed deals, still built skyscrapers that reached toward the sky. But he left the office by 5 most days now. He'd established the scholarship fund he'd promised Rachel he would create, which now supported the children of dozens of employees across his company, paying for schooling, healthcare, and opportunities their families could never have afforded alone. He visited children's hospitals quietly, without press cameras, because Elena had once asked him why sick kids didn't have toys like she did, and the question had lodged itself permanently in his conscience. That Saturday, the 3 of them sat together in the garden, having what had become a beloved weekly tradition. A simple picnic on an old quilted blanket, far from the elegant formal furniture that filled the rest of the estate. Elena, now 3.5 and constantly declaring herself big, sat cross-legged between them, carefully arranging her stuffed animals in a circle for what she called animal school. "Mr. Daniel," she said, looking up at him with the same enormous brown eyes that had first broken his heart open in that laundry room. "Why you cry that day? The clothes day?" Maria glanced at Daniel, curious how he would answer, though she already suspected the truth. Daniel considered the question carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer she could understand. "You know how sometimes your heart feels sad, even when nothing bad is happening?" Elena nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense to her 3-year-old wisdom. "My heart had been sad for a very long time," Daniel continued. "Even though I had a big house and lots of things, I didn't have anyone to share it with. And then I saw a very brave, very kind little girl trying to take care of me, even though it wasn't her job to do that. And it reminded me what really matters isn't having lots of things. It's having people who care about you and people you care about." Elena thought about this for a moment, then reached over and patted his hand with great solemnity. "I care about you, Mr. Daniel." "I know," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion even after all these months. "I care about you too. So much." Maria reached over and took Daniel's other hand, an act that had become natural between them over the past months, though neither had rushed to name exactly what they were becoming to each other. Some things, they both understood, didn't need to be rushed. They had time now. They had each other. "You saved us," Maria said softly, watching Elena return her attention to arranging her stuffed animal classroom. "Do you know that? That week I was sick, I was so afraid. Afraid of losing my job. Afraid of what would happen to Elena if something happened to me. I had no one else, Daniel. No family, no safety net. Just fear." "You didn't need saving," Daniel said. "You were already the strongest person I'd ever met. You'd been carrying an entire world on your shoulders alone, and you never once complained. I just finally opened my eyes and saw it." "Elena saved us both, I think," Maria said with a small, knowing smile. Daniel looked over at the little girl, now attempting to teach her stuffed elephant proper manners, completely absorbed in her imaginary world, utterly unaware of the magnitude of what she'd changed simply by trying to help her sick mother in the only way her small hands knew how. "She did," he agreed. "She taught a man who thought he had everything that he actually had nothing that mattered. And then she gave him a reason to build something real. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, painting the garden gold, Elena abandoned her stuffed animals and crawled into Daniel's lap, yawning the way small children do when a long day of important work, animal school, cookie baking, and general toddler business, finally catches up with them. "Mr. Daniel," she mumbled sleepily against his chest, her small hand curling into the fabric of his shirt, a shirt she had, in some strange twist of fate, once tried to wash herself. "You my family now." Daniel wrapped his arms around her gently, looking over at Maria, who watched them both with eyes full of a love that had grown slowly and surely over 6 transformative months. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking with an emotion so full it nearly overwhelmed him. "I'm your family now. Always." And in that golden garden, with a sleeping toddler in his arms and the woman who had unknowingly taught him how to feel again sitting beside him, Daniel Cole, the billionaire who once thought he had everything and possessed nothing, finally understood that the truest wealth in the world had never been counted in dollars. It had always been counted in moments like this one.